He disowned his only daughter because she chose love over his billions. Years later, when a stroke left him helpless and abandoned, the nurse who wiped his tears was the same daughter he threw away. But she never told him until the day his heart broke in her arms. Subscribe and stay with me, because this isn't just a billionaire story, it's a journey of betrayal, forgiveness, and a family finding their way back home. The grand marble halls of the Coleman estate echoed with tension. Amelia stood at the bottom of the staircase, a suitcase by her side, her heart pounding louder than her father's furious footsteps. Richard Coleman, billionaire, empire builder, and a man who had never heard no, stood towering before her, his face a storm of rage and disbelief. He would throw away everything for art. Him, Richard spat, the words like venom. A small-town teacher, that's the man you choose over your own blood? Amelia's voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. I choose love, Dad, not contracts, not mergers, love. The staff watched in frozen silence as Richard's pride eclipsed his love. With a cold wave of his hand, he roared, "Get out, from this day forward. You are no daughter of mine. Go build your fairy tale, but not with my name." Tears blurred Amelia's vision as she lifted her suitcase. She waited, hoped, but no apology came. Only silence and the heavy thud of the mansion doors closing behind her. As her car disappeared down the driveway, Richard turned to his inner circle, forcing a smirk. She'll be back. They always come back when they taste the real world. But he was wrong. What Richard didn't know was that Amelia had just walked out to build a life richer than his billions could ever buy. Yet fate was already setting a cruel trap for a day would come when the mighty Richard Coleman would lie helpless, waiting for a kindness he never gave. Years had passed since Amelia's silhouette disappeared beyond the mansion gates, but Richard Coleman never reached for her. He buried himself in boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and luxury that dulled his conscience. He was still the king of steel in the business world, or so he believed. But empires built on pride have silent cracks. One by one, his trusted partners began to circle him like vultures. Whispers in boardrooms turned into schemes. The very people he once boasted were his creation began carving pieces of his empire for themselves. It started with a scandal fabricated, but perfectly timed. The media, once his lapdog, now pounced, painting him as an aging tyrant out of touch with a modern world. Investors pulled back, stocks plummeted. The empire began to crumble brick by brick. But the harshest blow wasn't financial. One evening, while Richard sat in his lavish penthouse overlooking a city he once ruled, his body betrayed him, a sudden numbness. His glass of whiskey slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. He tried to call for help, but his mouth wouldn't form words. Paralyzed, alone, the man who once dismissed empathy as weakness now lay helpless, with no family to call, no friends willing to answer. His loyal business associates ensured he was discreetly transferred from his private hospital suite to a public facility. Far from headlines, far from disgrace. They left him there to rot a king without a kingdom. But destiny wasn't done with Richard Coleman. A quiet angel in scrubs was waiting. The same daughter he discarded was about to walk back into his life. And this time he wouldn't even recognize her. The ambulance door swung open, revealing a frail figure lying silently beneath layers of silk blankets. But the luxury couldn't hide the truth. Richard Coleman, once untouchable, was now reduced to a helpless patient. Eyes glassy, jaw clenched in defiant silence. The private hospital had no use for him now. He wasn't a profitable headline anymore. So with cold efficiency, they discharged him, leaving his care to the overburdened hands of a public city hospital. As the stretcher rolled through the worn hospital corridors, the world outside Richard's limited vision blurred into insignificance, until she appeared. Amelia stood at the nurse's station, clipboard in hand, dressed in the plain teal scrubs of a night shift nurse. But beneath that uniform was a heart battling an onslaught of memories. When her eyes fell on the patient's name, Richard Coleman, her hands trembled. Room 304, a colleague muttered, oblivious to the storm inside her. Poor man's got no family to look after him. High-profile case, but no visitors. Amelia didn't answer. She didn't need to. Fate had already chosen her. Moments later, she stood at the doorway of room 304, watching as orderlies settled the man she once called Dad into a sterile hospital bed. He looked so small now, his sharp suits replaced with pale gowns, his booming voice silenced by weakness. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. "Good evening, Mr. Coleman. My name is Amelia," she said, voice steady despite the knot in her throat. "I'll be your nurse tonight." He turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing as if trying to place her face. But years of absence, his fading health, and his own pride blinded him. He didn't recognize her. Amelia smiled gently, masking the tidal wave of emotions crashing within. She began adjusting his drip, smoothing out his pillow, performing every task with the same care she'd wished he'd once shown her. But this wasn't a moment for revenge. This was her moment of grace. As she tucked him in, Richard's hand veined and trembling brushed against hers. He flinched, embarrassed by his weakness. But Amelia didn't pull away. She simply whispered, "You're safe now." He closed his eyes, unaware that the daughter he'd cast away was the only soul standing between him and total oblivion. Amelia stepped out of the room, leaning against the wall, blinking back tears. This wasn't how she imagined seeing her father again. But destiny, it had its own timing. Days turned into weeks, but Richard Coleman never asked the nurse her last name. Perhaps pride kept him blind, perhaps his illness clouded him. Or maybe deep down, he refused to believe that the woman gently adjusting his blankets, the nurse patiently feeding him when his hands failed, could ever be his daughter. But Amelia knew, every time she wiped his brow, every whispered word of encouragement, it was a silent act of forgiveness. Richard wasn't the same tyrant who once ruled boardrooms. Illness had stripped him of his armor. In the quiet hours of the night, when the machines beeped softly and the hospital halls were empty, he spoke to Amelia not as a nurse, but as a stranger who wouldn't judge him. "I had a daughter once," he murmured one night, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. "Stubborn as her old man, beautiful, too, but she chose love over an empire. I told myself she'd come crawling back." Amelia paused, her hand tightening around the water cup. But she remained silent, letting him speak. "She never did," Richard chuckled bitterly. "Guess she was braver than I ever gave her credit for. I always thought wealth could buy loyalty, respect, even family. But look at me now." His voice cracked. "No empire, no daughter, just this bed." The weight of his words suffocated the room. Amelia's heart ached, but she held back tears. She couldn't reveal herself yet. This wasn't about her pain, it was about his awakening. So she did what a nurse would do. She sat by his side, gently holding his frail hand, and said softly, "Maybe she's closer than you think." Richard smiled weakly, not understanding the depth behind her words. Every day after that, their conversations grew longer. Richard spoke of regrets he'd never voiced, memories of Amelia's childhood that still haunted him, how he'd missed the sound of her laughter, how he wondered if she ever thought of him. And every day, Amelia listened, nurturing. Not just his broken body, but the cracks in his heart. In those quiet exchanges, her father was unknowingly being given a second chance. But the moment of truth was approaching. A storm was brewing outside this fragile bubble, and soon Richard would be forced to face the daughter he believed he'd lost forever. The hospital ward was unusually quiet that night. The rain tapped against the windows, a soft, rhythmic sound that should have been comforting, but for Richard Coleman it was deafening. He was restless, tossing under his blanket, his breathing shallow. his fingers gripping the bed sheets as if clinging to the last shreds of control. The empire he once commanded had slipped away. The boardrooms, the wealth, the power. None of it could rescue him now. And worst of all, he had no one left to blame but himself. Amelia noticed the change immediately as she entered his room. His proud, cold demeanor had crumbled into a fragile shell. His lips trembled as he muttered words into the empty air. She was right, Amelia was right. And I was too blind to see it. Her name left his lips like a confession, cracking open a dam of years-long regret. I sent her away, my only child. Told myself I was protecting the family legacy. But what legacy? His voice broke into a hoarse whisper. I have no family, no legacy, just a silence. Amelia's knees weakened, hearing him say her name. Broken and remorseful, pierced deeper than any wound. Then, in a moment of vulnerability, Richard's sobs escaped him. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he covered his eyes with trembling hands. I wish I could tell her, I wish I could say I'm sorry. But you'll never forgive me. She shouldn't. Amelia's heart shattered. The man who once banished her now lay before her not as a billionaire, not as a tyrant, but as a lonely father drowning in guilt. She took a step forward. Her hand reached out, hesitating as it hovered above his, torn between duty and daughterly instinct. Then she placed her hand gently over his clenched fists. I'm here, she whispered, her voice barely holding together. You're not alone, Mr. Coleman. He couldn't see through his tears. He didn't realize that the very daughter he was mourning was right there, holding his hand. Amelia sat beside him, staying silent as he wept. She didn't need to reveal herself yet. This moment wasn't about her being his daughter. It was about being the person he needed even when he didn't deserve it. That night, in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, the daughter comforted her father for the first time in years. But the weight of unspoken truth grew heavier. The secret wouldn't stay hidden much longer. Morning sunlight spilled through the blinds, casting soft beams across the hospital floor. Richard was propped up in bed, looking weaker but more at peace after last night's emotional collapse. Amelia entered quietly, carrying his breakfast tray, her heart a battlefield of emotions. Each passing day made it harder to keep her identity hidden. Yet she wasn't ready to shatter the fragile bond that had been forming. Not yet. But fate had other plans. A sharp knock at the door broke the calm. A man in a sleek grey suit strolled in. Uninvited, Victor Hayes, one of Richard's former board members. A snake who'd feasted on the downfall of the Coleman Empire. Well, Richard, I heard the mighty king is now lying in a public hospital bed. Poetic, isn't it? Victor's words dripped with venom as he glanced around disdainfully. Amelia's posture stiffened. Victor's eyes landed on her, a smirk curling his lips. And look at this. Even your daughter stooped to scrubbing floors and wiping your drool. Life's funny, huh? The air froze. Richard's entire body tensed. His hand gripped the blanket as he slowly turned to Amelia, confusion and disbelief flooding his face. What did you say? Victor leaned casually against the wall, relishing the chaos. You didn't know? That's Amelia, your precious daughter. Seems like she didn't need your billions after all. She's been playing Florence Nightingale while you rot. The words sliced through the room like an dagger. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't how she wanted the truth to come out. Richard's eyes locked onto her, searching, pleading for denial, but all he found was the quiet truth in her tear-filled gaze. His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Amelia, it's you? Amelia swallowed hard, stepping closer. Yes, Dad? It's me. Silence collapsed over them. Victor chuckled darkly, satisfied with the damage, and exited with a mocking bow. I'll leave you two to reconnect. When the door shut, it was as if the room lost all air. Richard's throat tightened, shame, regret, and disbelief crashed over him in waves. Why, he choked. Why would you after everything I said, after how I threw you away? Why would you take care of me? Amelia's voice was soft but unshakable. Because you're my father, and love doesn't abandon family. His lips quivered as tears flooded his eyes. The walls of pride he clung to for decades came crashing down, leaving nothing but a broken man desperate for redemption. I don't deserve your kindness, he whispered. Amelia sat by his side, gently taking his hand. You don't have to deserve it. You just have to accept it. And for the first time in years, Richard Coleman, a man who had once measured worth by empires and wealth, was humbled by something far greater. The unconditional love of a daughter. But healing an empire's worth of scars would take more than words. The atmosphere in room 304 was suffocating. Richard Coleman, once the lion of boardrooms, now sat slouched in his hospital bed, his gaze fixed out the window as if searching for a past he couldn't reclaim. Amelia stood near the door, watching him with a heart that refused to shatter, even as his words pierced deeper than any wound. You shouldn't be here, Amelia, Richard said, his voice hollow. You deserve a life better than taking care of a foolish old man who threw you away. Amelia took a slow breath. I'm exactly where I need to be. His fists clenched, trembling with frustration. Don't you get it? I don't deserve your kindness. I don't deserve you. I built an empire thinking it would make me invincible. But I was nothing more than a lonely man who pushed away the only person who ever mattered. He turned to face her, his eyes bloodshot. Voice cracking, go live your life. Amelia, don't waste it on me. Amelia stepped forward, her presence as calm and steady as his was chaotic. She sat at the edge of his bed, gently placing her hand over his. Do you know why I became a nurse? She asked softly. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Because I wanted to be everything you weren't. She continued, I wanted to heal. Not control, I wanted to serve. Not own, but I never stopped being your daughter. Tears welled in Richard's eyes. But Amelia's words pressed on. You can't push me away, Dad, not this time. I didn't come here to remind you of your failures. I came here to remind you that you're more than them. His defenses crumbled. He bowed his head, his once mighty shoulders shaking under the weight of regret. I don't know how to fix this, Amelia. You don't have to fix it, she whispered. You just have to be here, with me as my father. The dam burst. Richard's sobs were raw, unfiltered. He clung to Amelia's hand as if it were a lifeline. For the first time, the walls between them weren't built by pride or anger, but by vulnerability and love. In that sterile hospital room, an empire of glass shattered. And from its fragments, a father and daughter began to rebuild something far stronger than wealth. Family. The days that followed were different. Richard no longer watched Amelia from a distance, nor did he try to dismiss her presence with prideful excuses. Instead, he listened, he observed. The gentle way she cared for patients, the kindness in her smile, and the patience in her touch. For the first time in his life, Richard saw the true power of compassion, something no business meeting had ever taught him. One afternoon, as the golden light poured through the hospital window, Richard motioned for Amelia to sit beside him. His face was solemn, yet there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Amelia, he began, his voice steady but fragile. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm asking for a second chance, not as a billionaire, not as a man trying to control your life, but as a father who's ready to learn what love really means. Amelia's heart swelled. She had waited years to hear those words. But now that they were here, she realized this wasn't victory. This was healing. I don't need you to be perfect, Dad, she replied gently. I just need you to be present. To be here as my father, not the man chasing empires. Richard nodded, his eyes glistening. Then teach me, Amelia, teach me how to be the man you deserved all along. That evening, Richard made a quiet but life-changing decision. He requested a meeting with the hospital's director. I have funds left, he said firmly. Not much compared to my past, but enough to make a difference. I want to build something not for my name, not for my pride, but for those who are forgotten, like I was, and I want it to be in her name, Amelia Kerr. The director was stunned. Amelia, standing quietly at the doorway, felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't about redemption through grand gestures. This was a father choosing humility over pride. That night, as Richard and Amelia sat together watching the sun dip below the city skyline, there was no talk of fortunes lost or empires fallen. Just a father and daughter, starting from zero, but finally on the same page. For the first time in years, Richard felt wealthy again, not in his bank account, but in the quiet strength of his daughter's hand resting on his. The official papers were signed quietly. No press, no flashy headlines. Just a small office, a father and daughter, and a single-page document that would breathe life into a new dreamer, Amelia Kerr Community Hospital. Richard wasn't interested in cutting ribbons or making speeches. He'd spent a lifetime building monuments to his ego. This time, he wanted to build something that would outlive pride, something that healed, that mattered. He and Amelia spent countless hours visiting neglected clinics, listening to nurses, patients, and families who had no one to fight for them. Richard, once an untouchable titan in glassed hours, now sat in plastic chairs beside children receiving treatment, asking questions, taking notes. The media eventually caught wind of the fallen billionaire working side by side with a nurse. But this time, the narrative was different. Photos of Richard helping paint walls at a community clinic went viral. A clip of Amelia teaching him how to change a patient's bandage with clumsy, oversized hands melted hearts across social media. Their story wasn't just about a billionaire's downfall, it was about his rise as a father. The public, once eager to watch his empire crumble, now rallied behind the journey. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up. But amidst the growing attention, Richard remained grounded. One evening, as they sat reviewing blueprints for the new hospital wing, Richard looked up to Amelia with a faint smile. You know, I used to think my name on a building meant I'd built a legacy. Amelia glanced at him, tilting her head with a knowing smile. But it's not the name on the building that matters. He continued, it's the hands that build it. And I'm proud that your hands are shaping mine now. Amelia reached across the table, squeezing his hand. This is our legacy, Dad, one we build together. Their bond had transformed from strained silence to a partnership built on trust, humility, and quiet, steady love. Brick by brick, they weren't just rebuilding Richard's legacy. They were rebuilding family. The grand opening of Amelia Kerr Community Hospital was modest compared to the galas Richard Coleman once hosted. There were no golden scissors or celebrity endorsements, just a simple stage, folding chairs, and a crowd filled with nurses, patients, and everyday families. But to Richard, it was the most important audience of his life. Dressed in a simple grey suit, walking with a cane yet standing tall with pride, Richard took slow, deliberate steps toward the podium. Amelia stood beside him, radiant in her nurse uniform, her eyes misty but filled with strength. The crowd hushed as Richard gripped the microphone. I built skyscrapers, he began, his voice steady but rich with emotion. I built companies that spanned continents, but none of it taught me what I'm about to say today. He paused, glancing at Amelia, who gave him an encouraging nod. I once believed that legacy was forged in stone and steel, that wealth measured a man's worth. But I was wrong. His hand gently rested on Amelia's shoulder. This hospital isn't my legacy. She is my daughter, Amelia Coleman, the woman who taught me that true wealth isn't counted in dollars but in lives touched, in hands held, in family restored. The crowd erupted into heartfelt applause. Tears streamed down Amelia's face as Richard, for the first time in public, embraced her not as a billionaire saving face, but as a father who had found redemption. Cameras captured the moment, but it wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about healing deep, generational healing. After the ceremony, as they walked through the bright, freshly painted corridors of Amelia Care, Richard marveled at the laughter of children, the comforting buzz of life returning to spaces once forgotten. "I used to fear losing my empire," Richard whispered as they paused near a mural of the hospital's new motto, "Healing with Heart." "But now," he continued, squeezing Amelia's hand, "I realize I never truly built one until today." Amelia smiled, leaning into his shoulder. "Welcome home, Dad," as the sun streamed through the hospital windows, casting a golden glow on father and daughter. The world didn't just witness the rebirth of a man. They witnessed the rise of a true legacy, one built not on power, but on love, forgiveness, and family. The camera slowly pulls back. Amelia and Richard stand side by side, watching as patients and families walk through the glass doors of Amelia Care. The once iron-hearted billionaire now gently places his hand over a newborn's head as a young mother passes by. His face softened with a smile that only comes from a heart set free. Above them, the hospital's inscription glistens in the sunlight. "True legacy is love passed forward." Richard turns to Amelia, his voice low but filled with peace. "I thought I built an empire, Amelia. But today you showed me what a real empire looks like." Amelia's eyes shimmer with tears, but her smile is unwavering. An empire built brick by brick, heart by heart. The screen fades as they walk down the corridor together, not as a nurse and a billionaire, but as a daughter and a father, finally a family. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll past. He'd like to support more emotional family stories like this. And if you believe love can heal even the deepest wounds, click subscribe and join us on this journey of forgiveness, redemption, and real human connections. Your next life-changing story is just a video away.